Hello, and welcome to the first part of the Goose Pond volunteer training. I'm Emma Raasch. I'm the land steward at Goose Pond, and I'll be the leader for this training. All right, so in this video, we're going to cover some of the nice to know topics, things like the history of fire in Wisconsin, fire ecology, and fire-dependent ecosystems. And so those are things that you don't necessarily need to know to volunteer on a burn, but are good background. And we're gonna get into the need to know, so things like fire behavior, burn crew assignments, PPE, tools and equipment, etc. But we're going to get even deeper into some of those topics and expand upon them in the in-person training. So to start out, what is prescribed fire? So this is the definition provided by the Wisconsin DNR, which says prescribed fire is the intentional application of fire to a specific pre-planned area under specific environmental conditions to accomplish planned land management objectives. Without the use of prescribed fire as a management tool, Wisconsin could lose many of its native grassland, wetland, and savanna plant communities. So the main point I want to get across using this definition is that there's a lot of planning involved. So it's not just throwing a match on the ground and hoping something good happens, but it's the intentional application of fire under specific conditions to achieve a specific goal. Okay, so history of fire in Wisconsin. So prior to European settlement, at least half of Wisconsin, that's about 17.5 million acres, was burned on a regular basis. And by a regular basis, I mean every 3 to 5 years. And so on this map, the area in red is that 3 to 5 year range. And then as you get further north, it starts to have longer time in between burns. Um, but since about 150 years ago, when European settlement began, fire has been largely suppressed. All right, so I've got two maps here. One on the side is the early vegetation of Wisconsin. And next to that is, again, the Wisconsin Fire Needs Assessment Map, which shows the areas of highest priority for fire. And so you can see that the red, the highest priority areas, largely correspond to the yellow on this early vegetation of Wisconsin map. Which suggests that our prairies and our oak savannas are the ones that are in highest need of fire. So, what is the fire like today in Wisconsin? So, about 4.5 million acres in Wisconsin would benefit from fire management. And that means that in order to maintain our existing fire dependent communities, we'd have to be burning about 1 million acres annually. And currently, we're sitting at about 50,000 to 75,000 acres burned annually. So there's a lot more acres to be gained, and people like you who will help us get there. All right, so we're going to zoom in a little bit more into Goose Pond and the area surrounding it. So this map shows the boundaries of what was called the Empire Prairie, or the Wisconsin's 20-mile prairie. And so Goose Pond is right here. And so Arlington is really at the heart of what was the Empire Prairie. Um, and to give you a better idea of what this blob on a map would have looked like, I've got an excerpt from The Prairie and Its People. So this is a quote from Henry Merrill from 1834. He wrote, "We struck the prairie, which to me was a beautiful sight. Here we could see a grass plot for 4 or 5 miles, and not a tree or a bush on it. Then again, as we passed on, we could see orchards, as it were, the grass up to our horses' mouths, so that they would nip at it as we rode upon the jump." So going from that description to this current land cover map. So this light yellow color represents crop cover, and the orange is herb cover. So that could mean a couple things, but um, what I'm going to be focusing on is like prairie restorations or natural areas. So again, here's Goose Pond, these two little bodies of water. And we've got these orange blobs around, which represent our prairie restorations. And then up here to the northeast, there's another orange blob, which is Erstad Prairie in Shaneberg Marsh. Um, but despite our large efforts with those orange blobs, we are an island in the middle of corn and soybeans. So land has changed quite a bit since 1830s. So how did the fires start? So before there were people with drip torches in their hand, um, the indigenous peoples of the area were the ones setting the fires. So there's a common misconception that all fires were started via lightning, which isn't to say that no fires were started by lightning. There were certainly some, but in Wisconsin, most of the fire, and therefore most of the creation of the prairies and these open habitats were due to the indigenous people's use of fire. So, um, there's a lot of different reasons that they would be burning the land, similar to today. There's a lot of different reasons, but some of those reasons include clearing the land for crops, improving grazing and forage for game species, directing game migration, clearing brush to ease travel, and managing the land for specific plant and animal species. So, hearing those reasons for burning, why are we still burning today? So, this is a list of benefits to plants provided from the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council's website. And this is really just kind of the tip of the iceberg, but some of the reasons that fire benefits plants is by maintaining the herbaceous structure and our open nature of fire adapted plant communities, increasing diversity and heterogeneity. It creates open pockets of soil that helps seeds actually make contact with the soil to germinate. It reduces competition for slower growing trees like our oaks, recycles nutrients from burned fuels back into the soil. Um, it can sometimes reduce the presence of fire intolerant non-native species. Um, can increase soil carbon content and increase groundwater recharge. So, um, again, benefits to wildlife, thanks to the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council website. Um, reduces shrub and tree growth, creating open habitat for upland game and waterfowl. Stimulates growth of flowering forbs, which attracts pollinators, invertebrates, and seed-eating birds. Um, kind of an aside on that, by stimulating the growth of flowering forbs, it's a really direct benefit to us at Goose Pond when we're collecting seeds. We can collect a lot more seed in a burned area or a burned unit than an unburned unit, which can really help us get a bang for our buck. But it also improves plant productivity, which increases fledgling success for grassland nesting birds, um, creates heterogeneous forest structure, and again, creates those open pockets, which makes it a lot easier for different critters to navigate that environment and potentially build nests. All right, so the next thing I'll talk about briefly is the idea of leaving a refugia. So fire refugia are landscape elements that remain unburned or minimally affected by fire, thereby supporting post-fire ecosystem function, biodiversity, and resilience to disturbances. So all of those benefits that fire can give to plants and wildlife, we want to make sure that we're not outdoing them by potential costs. So for example, if we're trying to help a certain insect species, maybe like a Sylphian borer moth or something, we also know that Sylphian borer moths are susceptible to death by fire. So we want to make sure that we are helping them by promoting the plants that they rely on, which are in the Silphium family, like compass plant and prairie dock, but that we're not outright burning them all up. So we leave areas of refugia. So areas that we are not going to burn to help mitigate those potential negative impacts. So, different considerations for leaving a refugia is the size of the unit and the areas burned. So, for a small remnant, we might want to leave a third of it unburned, versus in a restored prairie, maybe we can have a little bit smaller of an area or even a much bigger area if our restorations are, 60 acres versus 2.5 acres of a remnant. So frequency of burning, wanting to give certain units a break in between burning, spatial arrangement. So in a number of our units, if we're burning a large area, say in the wood family prairie, we're going to leave unburned areas in that same prairie. And temporal arrangement, again, sort of similar to the frequency, making sure that we move that area of refugia so that the areas that are being remained or being left unburned don't degrade by never getting burned. All right, so a couple flashy pictures on the next few slides to not only show you the type of habitats that benefit from fire and need fire, but also, this is what it's all about. So this is a prairie restoration at Goose Pond full of lead plant, which is this purple stuff in there. The Sylphium borer moth that I mentioned in my refugia example is right here. Rusty patch bumblebee, monarch butterfly, eastern meadowlark, all of these grassland species that we love um, really need fire to remain. So prairies, wetlands, so things like marshes and sedge meadows. So a couple pictures here, Blanding's turtle, whooping cranes, these are all species that require well-managed wetlands. Oak communities. So this could be anything from an oak woodland to an oak savanna, oak barrens, but all these oak systems require fire. And then pine communities. So similarly, pine forests, pine barrens, these pine systems also require fire and house a lot of our favorite creatures, like these glass lizards and um, others. All right, so now we're going to transition to the need to know. So these are kind of more technical topics that we will introduce now and go further in during the in-person training. Okay, so fire basics. Fire needs three things to occur. So it needs heat. I don't know why my cursor is doing that. So it needs heat, oxygen, and fuel. So you can think about to get rid of fire, to suppress fire, you just have to take away one or more of those things. So removing heat, that could be by adding water. Removing fuel, that could be by manually like raking away fuel. and that could be by removing oxygen, so smothering a flame with something like a flapper, which we'll talk about later. Um, and then there's the fire behavior triangle. The fire behavior triangle we're going to talk about a lot more during the in-person, but basically the three factors that impact fire behavior are weather, fuel, and topography. Okay, so types of fire. There are three types of fire: backing fire, flanking fire, and head fire. And all of these types have to do with how the fire is moving in relation to the wind. So our first example here is a backing fire. So we see the wind is moving from the top of the screen to the bottom. And the fire is moving from the bottom of the screen to the top. So a backing fire is a fire that is moving into the wind or backing into it. So it's working against the wind. So that said, it's often going to be moving slower and it's going to have a lot shorter flame lengths than the next two fires that we'll look at. All right, so flanking fire. In relation to the wind, flanking fires are moving perpendicular. So you can see wind is going again from the top to the bottom of the screen, and the fire is moving outwards. So it's moving perpendicular to the wind. So flanking fires are intermediate fires. So in between backing and head fire, these are going to have higher flame lengths than a backing fire. They're going to move a little bit faster than a backing fire. Um, but then head fire has the highest flame lengths and it also moves the most quickly. And that's because it is moving with the wind. So head fire is going in the same direction of the wind. So if the wind is going from the top of the screen to the bottom, that's the same way a head fire is going. Okay, so internal ignition. This refers to igniting inside a burn unit. And the reasons for doing this could be to build additional black or widen a line, or to moderate fire behavior, or to, get the fire moving more quickly. So we're going to talk about a couple examples of internal ignition using strip head fires, flanking strips, and dot ignition. Okay, so here is a picture that shows a strip head fire. So in this picture, the wind is moving towards these trees. So it's going like that. And so Kayla here in this picture, she is lighting a strip directly from this black all the way over to that black. And so the fire is going to be pushing towards the tree line with the wind. Um, and so then we have an area like this where all of this is nice and black. So we widened our black and we also got the fire moving a lot quicker. This fuel is really short and sparse, so the amount of time it would take for the fire to back into that fuel is a lot longer than if we light a head fire that's able to zip right through. So this is strip head fires again, so the same thing that we just looked at in the picture. These are fires that are being lit so that they are going to get help and pushed by the wind. So dot ignitions, this is a way to still fill an area or widen the black, but to do so in a way that doesn't have such intense fire behavior as a strip head fire might. So it's the same principle, but instead of having a complete solid line, it's just dots. And then those dots are able to radiate out and fill the area. So I'm going to go back to this picture. So, like I said, this is a strip head fire, but we could have utilized drop ignition and we could have utilized like flanking strips, to do this same thing. It just would have been not as quick. So if we would have been doing dot ignition, instead of having this nice solid line of fire ignited, it would be maybe a dot here and then walk a bit, and a dot there and walk, and a dot. So you get it. It's like a broken line. Um, but in this picture, if we were to have done flanking strips and if we would have chosen that, it probably would have been because the fuel would have been higher and we wanted to mediate fire behavior. But instead, that would look like taking fire here and moving it out. So moving it into the wind and allowed to radiate out. Yeah, but we'll talk more about that during the in-person training. Okay, so a ring fire brings all of these principles together. So all of the types of fire, backing, flanking, and head fires are utilized here. And the different techniques for internal ignition can also be utilized given different conditions. So I'm just going to talk about like the general idea of what a ring fire is. So in this case, we have a really straightforward unit. It's just a square. And our wind is moving like this. So this person is starting in the corner furthest downwind. So you're going to be lighting backing fire first. It's a slow moving fire and it's going to build your black so that when you light fire up here, the head fire, you almost have like a catching mitt down here to catch that head fire. So ignition point or point of ignition is right here. And then two teams are going to separate. So one team is going to go this way. Another team is going to go this way. Okay, so here's our point of ignition. Our team separated. One is moving around the unit here. One is moving around the unit there. And so once we get to this line, we're transitioning into flanking fire. So it's pushing into the unit that way. And once there's enough black in this downwind side, we're able to ring the unit, meaning these two lines are going to connect in the furthest point upwind and light the head fire and let the fire move itself in and fill in all the black. And again, this is something we're going to talk more about in person, but just to give you the general idea. All right, so now that we've talked about ignitions, we're going to talk about the other half of a prescribed burn. So not just starting the fire, but making sure that the fire remains contained and stays within the lines of the unit that you're burning. So holding refers to any action used to contain a fire within the defined boundary of a burn unit. And it's closely coordinated with the ignitions that we were talking about previously. So some examples of holding could be using water, either backhands like is shown in this picture, or it could be using mechanized water like a pump on a truck or a UTV. Hand tools are also used for holding, so we'll talk more about those in a little bit. Lookouts can also count as holding. So somebody who's going to stand at a good line of sight, keep an eye on the fire and making sure it is staying in the area you want it to. And then mop up. So mop up is after the burn is complete. It's extinguishing smoldering fuels, burning snags, other fuels. So typically between like 30 to 100 feet of the fire break. So we want to make sure that there's nothing still smoking or smoldering or certainly not still actively burning. Mop up is a much longer process when you're burning in woodlands and savannas, when you have heavy fuels to put out. Most of the mop up at Goose Pond is pretty darn simple. It could just be waiting for things to stop smoldering kicking out tufts of grass. But there are certainly things to look out for when mopping up a grassland unit, because things can keep burning under tussocks and other things that are a little bit less obvious than a big burning log. Okay, so now we're going to get into what to expect when you volunteer on a burn. So you can expect when you get here that you're going to be given PPE. There are some PPE that you are required to bring, like leather gloves and leather boots, but we provide the Nomex suits, um, safety glasses, etc. You can expect to be briefed on the burn to come. We're going to talk a lot more about that during the in-person, so I'm going to keep moving on. Um, You'll be given a crew assignment, so you'll be told which side of the burn you're going to be working on and who your squad boss is. Of course, you'll do the burn, and then after the burn, we'll all get together for an after action review and talk about what went well, what could have gone better, and if what we wanted to happen happened. And again, we're going to get into what that after action review is more in depth in the in-person training and talk about how you can be an active participant in it. Okay, so here's just some examples of the type of PPE you should expect. So this yellow suit in the middle, that's a Nomex jumpsuit. Um, Hard hats. Not every burn is a hard hat super, super important, like in the grassland units, but still good to use one if you have one. Leather gloves is a must. Leather boots is a must. Eye protection is really highly encouraged. And then so a couple other things here. Here's a mask. So that's really helpful. I wanted to have a bandana on here as well, just to clarify that bandanas are not masks, so they're not going to protect you against breathing in smoke and other particulates. But I still sometimes like to have a bandana just for heat protection. Um, but just to know it's not going to protect your lungs. Water, so drinking water, that's something everybody needs to have on a burn, and I like to think of it as PPE because it really is keeping you safe and able to continue. And then radios. It's another thing that isn't technically PPE, but I like to throw it in there because communication is super necessary to staying safe on a burn. And we're going to talk a lot more about communication and radio use during the in-person training. All right. So what to expect in terms of the organization of a burn and kind of the hierarchy of leadership. So each burn will have a singular burn boss, and that is the person who's responsible for all the crew and prescribed fire activity on the site during the burn. And so there will be two squad bosses at least. Um, Sometimes more if there's a separate squad for internal ignition or things like that. But that is a person who leads a prescribed fire squad, typically a team of up to like 2 to 6 people, and they're assigned to a particular task on the burn. So maybe they're going on the south line or the north line. Um, and then the crew members are that crew of 2 to 6 people. So they're working as a unit under the squad boss, and the squad boss is working under the burn boss. Okay, so tools and equipment. So this is just kind of a quick overview of what some of these tools are, but I won't get too much into how they are used. But so drip torches are the primary way that we do the ignitions on the burn. That's not to say they're the only way, but it's typically what we use. So it's a mixture of diesel and gas within the drip torch. Um, So the gasoline helps carry the flame from the drip torch to the ground, and the diesel helps provide a longer residual burn time. So it's typically a mixture of like 60-40 diesel to gas. Um, and then, so different ways that you can use water on a burn. So bat cans right here um, work really well, especially if you're in an area that vehicles cannot access. But then we also at Goose Pond will have these water pumps that can go inside the truck or in the Kubota. Okay, so other tools used in prescribed fire. So I mentioned these a little bit with the holding, but so flappers here, just a rubber piece on a stick that you can use to smother the flames, and we'll go over the best techniques for using those during the in-person training. And then I have a variety of different rakes here, and so not all rakes behave the same in different fuels. So um, something like this fire rake with the big tooths on it, really, really great in woodlands and with large brush. But it's, in my experience, not super helpful in grass fuels. This hard rake can be pretty useful in grass fuels, especially if the grass is not already mowed and you're just trying to scrape them away. Um, and then a flimsy rake here, and those work super well to clear heavy fuel in areas that it has been already cut or mowed. Um, and the point I'm getting across here is that there's a lot of different hand tools that work pretty similar. The idea is to, remove fuel, um, but they have different uses in different fuels, and we'll go over that more, and you'll have a chance to use them and kind of see, what your preference is. Okay. So during the in-person portion of the training, we're going to have a little bit more of the presentation before getting into live fire. And that presentation is going to cover fire behavior, so how weather topography and fuel affects fire behavior. We're going to talk about spot fire suppression, go into what to expect for a pre-burn briefing and after action review. We're going to look at types of fire breaks, and we're going to talk about safety. So I'll explain what laces is and different watch out situations. And we'll talk about radios and communication. And then the fun part, or hopefully the fun part, are the live fire exercises. So we're going to, before we get into live fire, talk about different tools and equipment. And so you'll be able to hold them, use them, see how they work. And then for the live fire exercises, we're going to burn fire breaks and practice spot fire suppression. And if there's time, maybe do a ring fire. But final takeaways, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that I'm gonna still talk about, but ultimately getting out on a burn is the best way to learn. So I encourage all of you to yeah, just learn more by working in the field, and I'm excited to see you at the training. Thank you.